When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite. Obey your thirst.
Oh, Hilton stay, your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay, oh, Hilton stay.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. Enjoy comfortable rooms and friendly service when you stay with Hilton instead. Save up to 25% this season when you book with Hilton. Hilton for the stay. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. You're ready to move your business forward, but first, you need to find the right team. Start your search with Indeed-sponsored jobs. It can help you reach qualified candidates fast, ensuring your listing is the first one they see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. See the results for yourself. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, a horror gaming podcast and proudly part of Bloody FM, Bloody Disgusting's premium podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And it's our favorite time of the year where we must endure the arduous task of amassing a list of our 10 favorite games that are best representative of the very best that horror offered in 2025. So for part one of our Game of the Year coverage, we're going to be running through our number 10, 9, 8, 7, and 6 picks while giving you guys a quick refresher at the end of the episode of what we picked this episode. And then we're going to finalize our lists in the subsequent week. So as is usually the case with our Game of the Year coverage and our episodes where we rank things, if Neil or I mentions a game that the other has on their list, but it's higher, we'll sidebar that game until we reach its point on the other person's list. That just kind of like helps keep things moving along. And at the same time, it's always funny to see like what we have, in similarity wise in terms of like our picks. But at the same time, that can be chaotic at times. But I think we're up to the challenge, are we not?
Yeah. And hopefully this isn't the year where we've picked the games in the opposite order, to each other. And so episode one is just us going next time.
Yeah. Which has certainly happened in the past. But I think, as seemingly is always the case, this was a really fantastic year for horror. And I think that, if anything, this was maybe like a year where it was even more varied in terms of the types of horror games that we received, whether that be genre, whether subgenre wise, whether that be the sort of like variety of game experiences in terms of like how utilizing mechanics to tell compelling narratives and vice versa. And so it'll be really interesting, I think, to get down to sort of the brass tacks of what our most memorable experiences of the year were. But for you, Neil, like how would you summarize 2025 as the year for horror gaming?
I think this year I definitely started slow. I think that stopped my sort of exploration from being as quick as previous years. Hence, we didn't do like a halfway sort of game of the year thing because I couldn't really vouch for many at that point. But that problem soon went away. I think, here we are at the end of the year once again, like getting down to 11 games and going, oh Christ, I've stun locked myself into trying to pick something else. But yeah, there's so many different things as well. Like even stuff I didn't pick that we will, like, before we get to our number ones in the next episode, go over some of our honorable mentions. But yeah, it's just so many games of different types. Like I was surprised by that. Some of it just came naturally just because of the work I was doing at the time, that you had extra focus on certain genres. But yeah, just from its size again as well, which has been a common theme, I think, with any sort of Safe Room End of Year episode, is because we do the horror bite stuff. We play games of all sort of shapes and sizes, and some of those sneak in here and there, and shorter games that maybe like a couple of hours can be big contenders in the same way as something that takes you 60 hours to play. It's quite good like that. But yeah, even the old favorites as well, just coming back into it has been nice. Like just genres of games having like new IPs, if you will, out there and stuff like that. It's been great to see. Like it's mad how many different sort of types. As much as we've had like types, that have sort of been the genre of our year. It's yeah, it's still got a lot of the classics.
Yeah, I think I can definitely relate to your sort of like trajectory in the year in terms of actually getting to delve into some of these games, right? Because I think, I've had an incredibly jam-packed beginning of the year, just like with life, that didn't really afford me the opportunity to get to spend a lot of time with, games that were coming out outside of like the immediate coverage specifically for the podcast. So I always find that this time of the year and the lead up and kicking off for me, probably at the end of October, I get to really kind of like, despite the chaos of the holidays and whatnot, I really get to sit down and kind of like make a list, decide what I want to tackle, what is like the essential games that I need to play. And then in that lead up to naturally game of the year season, getting to play as much as I can when I can. And sort of that is a joy. And at the same time, it results in a lot of slow next mornings after, late night sessions have spilled over into the early hours of the morning. And I think that, that is one of those things that's like a love-hate relationship, if you will, with this time of the year, because it's great getting to play catch up. And, as is always the case, there's so many creative new games and creative new developers coming up seemingly every other month or every other day, as it were. And getting to try to just get to see different points of view on genre, getting to see people drawing influence from, specific, maybe bigger name developers, but at the same time, getting to familiarize ourselves with sort of like the new class, if you will, through something like Horror Bites, and then getting to see potentially how that can influence, games that end up over here, even on, our Safe Room game of the year list. So I'm excited to see what you have on your list this year, as I always am, because it really is one of those years that as we get busier and busier, outside of the podcast, we don't always check in about like what the other one's playing, because that's the nature of life. So I feel like it's going to be a lot more surprising, I think, this year, what made our lists and whatnot, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, I mean, like even when I was like compiling all games like for this year, I like had this massive list of things like just even outside the horror genre, which is fantastic. But stuff that was just like close, I think, as well, which I quite enjoyed, and like I'll mention them anyway. I think just because like they're not going to be here because they're not really horror in the truest sense, but they have bits to them that maybe that are really good. I mean, Claire Obscure has been like doing wonders everywhere, in terms of, won all the game awards, etc., etc. But it really is just like the darkness in that game is like ridiculous sometimes. Like it really just goes for shock and awe at times in such a wonderful way. And stuff like that's not really horror. I just want to mention them because we're not going to. Why not? I'll mention a couple of games that aren't, because I'd like to talk about them quickly. But stuff like Blueprints is like had a big influence, I think, on certain games I've enjoyed this year. Like they'll be on this list, and it probably just came at the right time of the year for me. But just the whole sort of solving of a mystery in that sense was just like really riveting, and also to a T, which by the creator of Katamari Damacy. It was just such an adorable, like basically little anime show as a game, which unfortunately this week has been reported as not selling very well, like to the point that developers kind of had to move back to Japan, might not make a game again, which is horribly sad. But I feel like I need to shout out because it's just, if you like horror and you like, if you don't mind a bit of wholesomeness, that's wholesome and weird in the way that the creator Katamari Damacy could make it, and it deserves a lot more love. So go out there and play to a T. Go on.
Yeah, I think that getting to see the ways in which you know, you can see games that maybe are not horror to the degree that they wouldn't be fitting here, but you can still appreciate, the genre elements that they utilize that are inherently horror, can really sort of inform their approach to whether it's world building, whether it's storytelling. The oldest, well, at this point, geez, I'm dating myself, but like the oldest example that I can think of for something like that would be like, that game Gone Home, right? Which is not a horror game, but that would be an example of a game that some people might consider to be slightly horror adjacent because of the fact that, it utilizes elements that are, found within the horror genre, to sort of like cast this illusion of mystery, right? And so like thinking about how horror, no matter the year, can be felt and, see how that influence spreads, I think is one of the most exciting things about, every single year, getting to not only experience a variety of games that are outside of the genre that clearly we are very passionate about, but still getting to see that influence and sort of like the versatility there that is, continually proving why horror is such an important genre that, while we have things like the Horror Game Awards cropping up that is, naturally giving the genre it's sort of like praise and comeuppance, it's still a genre that I think the extent to which it has an influence is still not as widely celebrated and acknowledged as maybe it should be. But I think that we're getting there.
Yeah. If it's happening in the movie world, then it can happen here too. Just have to make it so.
But with those sort of like opening remarks about the year 2025 in horror, let's get right into part one of our Game of the Year coverage. And as is customary, Neil, I'm going to let you kick things off with your number 10 pick.
Well, I will start with a game that very much encapsulates the genre of the year for us, which is point and click, and that is Beyond Boulein's Carnival. Is my number 10 pick. On your list?
Terrific. It is not on my list, but that is a game that I would be mentioning during my honorable mention. So I'm glad I'll get the chance to kind of dive into this one with you to start things off.
There you go. That's going to happen, obviously, between us. But yeah, so as we covered a few of Beyond Boulein's games in Horror Bites form, this was a bit more full fat in terms of like the stuff we've been seeing before was kind of about like half an hour, I suppose. This is a few hours long, closer to like what you would deem a full-length point-and-click adventure game. It uses the history of Venice as well as having folk horror in it, and basically uses that history and the isolation of Venice at that time during the era of Mussolini from the rest of Italy, but because of how it was structurally built, means it has its own little world basically, and that's used to create like a really interesting flavor to it. I mean, what impressed me most is how much Beyond Buildings like fleshes out Venice and its inhabitants in such a relatively short playtime. Like, even though it's more fleshed out than previous games, those also had like a really strong snippets of storytelling and helped you sort of get into like the characters that were in it. Here, yeah, with that extra time and bigger conversations with people around, it really does just sink you into the world. I mean, we learned obviously in talking to the developer, the history of like writing stories. So it's unsurprising that these games do feel like they come off the page, in a lot of ways. The pixel art is great. I mean, it's so detailed for such simple stuff. The character models are like the most basic sort of drawings, if you will, but the environments and the characters themselves are animated in such a great way that makes it has an old school feel, but like it's so wonderfully detailed. And then when you do get those sort of close-ups and cutscene type things, they are really well drawn as well. Like the reaction shots, like the famous one of the mustachioed man and stuff like that. I just beautifully done. I think it's because it's Venice as well, like the setting of like Don't Look Now. That always appeals to me anyway. But adding that folk horror nature and just how you sort of delve into it, in much the same way we said about stuff like Hob Sparrow, where it's the gradual sort of decline and steeping into this world beyond the world. But here, there's an innocence to it here where it's because it's isolated from like the rest of Italy by the way it's structured, that you kind of understand this. I think we've talked about this on plenty of occasions about the idea of like even in like big countries you can have pocket universes effectively just because of how isolated they are. And this is a good example of that. Like you can be part of a country and still feel like your own thing and have your own traditions and feel alien, to the rest of the country. And like for an outsider coming into that environment, as the story doesn't here, it adds that extra layer of alien nature to it. And that's the best sort of setup for a folk horror story as well. That we just have that sort of eerie uncertainty and wonder about things that you think you'd know. Everyone's got their very obvious ideas of what Venice is and that, but this plays with it in really interesting ways, using that history, of like actual historical events in there to sort of add a nice flavour to this really compelling folk horror. Like it's nice to see the jump as well that Beyond Billions has gone from those shorter games into doing something longer, and it really paying off and really showing that all the ingredients were there and it works in either format. And that's difficult. It was impressive enough to make a point and click game that was like half an hour long, but to do one a few hours long and fill it with so much rich detail and story, fantastic.
Yeah, I find that sometimes when creatives jump around between subgenres of horror, there's a tendency, I suppose, for their sort of like tone and style to not really alter much between that, right? Which can be fine, can still yield a good game, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily always show a proper understanding of like the inherent strengths of a subgenre. And again, with like Jan Boolin's games, he truly understands like the best aspects of each subgenre that his games tackle, because as I mentioned in spoiler in our horror bites of the year coverage, like I talked about Snarl, which is his shorter cosmic horror point and click adventure game that he released this year on Itch. And like again, a lot of his games dabble in cosmic horror, and so for Carnival to be folk horror and abiding by the core tendencies of what makes good folk horror, that shows just again like a really great understanding of genre and subgenres at that, and more importantly like a continuation of like the really stellar writing that's present in all of his games. And I think for me what I really appreciated about that setting of Venice was like how, while it is historical fiction, like the historical part of it, like the story itself actually dabbles in that, right? It's not only that specific time period, but like that plays into why the journalist who's the protagonist is actually there. But on top of that, you learn about the conflict, the societal conflict that's going on there between the people that have lived in this place all their life, and then, their opposition to the outside world, basically encroaching on what makes their community so unique. Now, granted, that's going to be expounded upon and explored in ways that become increasingly supernatural, but it's the perfect sort of like powder keg environment for a folk horror story, right? It doesn't have to be this usual thing of like, you go to an island, you're investigating a missing person, and then your only means of getting off the island is already left, and now you're trapped there. It's like, no, this is a place that the protagonist wants to be in because that's where the story is. And then in investigating that story, they go further down this rabbit hole and become immersed in this world that they don't understand. But the reasons they don't understand it is not as in your face as is typically the case with a lot of folk horror, where it's like, oh, these weird rituals that don't make any sense. And it's like, no, a majority of Carnival is you being a stranger in a strange land, culturally speaking, just not being from the country, but also like there's this societal aspect to it that you're trying to navigate and the nuances of that. To what you had said about, seeing the skill set improving with each release, like the pixel art here has a scale to it that we haven't seen before in Jacob's games. And so I think that in and of itself was like very impressive. You get to have this like world map even that allows you to freely roam between different sections of the city and whatnot. So like the scale is more grandiose, but in getting larger, you're not losing that sense of detail that's so important to pixel art. If anything, it's even more refined. And yeah, I found that overall, like, again, this was one of those games that, had I had 11 picks for my games of the year, it would be on there. But yeah, really fantastic addition to his catalog of games. And I'm looking forward to seeing, what comes next, because Carnival's a great indication that, he has no inkling of slowing down in terms of expanding on that tool set.
Absolutely. So yeah, we're on to your number 10.
Yeah, my number 10 pick is going to be Clover Pit from developer Panic Arcade.
Okay, not on my list.
Did you even get around to playing this one? I'm curious.
No. This
Okay.
is all fresh to me. So pitch me this game.
All right, so Clover Pit is probably the last game that I would have expected to really click with me. This is a roguelite slot machine game, which I'm obviously I'm not a big gambler in my own life, but also just like the notion that that's going to be the framework for a game that operates in the realm of horror. I was just like, okay, what the hell? How the hell could this be fun for more than the 15 seconds of putting a quarter in and spinning? But it ends up being a game that I spent an insane amount of time with. So the whole gist and conceit of Clover Pit is that yes, you are quite literally spinning a slot machine. However, you are spinning for your life, as sort of the genre aspect of Clover Pit, in that you are quite literally standing on a grate that is overlooking a pit. And if you are unable at the end of 3 rounds to basically meet the amount of money that is predetermined that you need to deposit, that gate is going to inevitably fall into a pit to your death. So now, how is that interesting or compelling to the degree that I would spend probably 20 hours playing this game that's all about just spinning? Well, there is actually a great deal of strategy in this. And this is a trend that I've seen a lot actually with slot machines, in terms of utilizing that for horror games, and also even in, oddly enough, like RPGs this year. There have been a number of games that are able to take that very simplistic mechanic and imply a good deal of strategy to it. And Clover Pit, in my opinion, is the best example of that. So you are able, within the course of those 3 rounds, to meet that amount of coins that you need to deposit. You are able to buy, utilizing tickets that you earn with each spin, or each spin performed at the end of a round. You are able to buy charms, which act as either multipliers for your score, or they grant you like special abilities that could, again, be multipliers, or they can have even more specific sort of attributes to them. So you can increase your luck. You can change certain icons that pop up to have either modifiers, or at the same time, a variety of new combos that will string together even more points and result in more coins. And so, that layer of strategy, again, that sounds kind of simplistic, but there is a lot of nuance to the meta game here, which is utilizing your coins, utilizing your spins, because you have the option of either paying to have one of 3 spins, and you could have, if you pay whatever the amount is, you get 7 spins per turn. Or you can opt to have 3 spins and then get more tickets at the end of that round. And so the sort of metagame between, when do I want to prioritize earning more coins? When do I want to prioritize earning more tickets, which in turn allows me to buy more charms, which you have a set number of that you can use? That all yields a really addictive, I found, which maybe, I don't know what that says. It's probably a good thing I don't gamble in real life, but that's like a very enticing sort of like repetition layer to one more spin, one more spin, one more round, and trying to get that next high score, which it's not just about high scores. It's when you unlock a certain amount of coins, you will trigger some type of unlock that comes later on that can be used for the next time you play this game, which inevitably unlocks more charms. It unlocks new drawers for this like chest that's there that allows you to store charms, so you don't have to just like discard them when you reach your limit. And so there's various factors like that that take what is a very simplistic concept, but gives it a lot of layers of strategy to it, which is one of the reasons why I could put this game down. And it also just has like a really great like industrial hell setting. Like you're in this locked room, you're standing over a pit. The underneath the slot machine, there's like this trash can that looks like it's full of like meat. It's just like this very fucking weird sort of setting. But at the same time, I found that I really couldn't put this game down. And that's why it was my number 10 pick for the year. So maybe at some point, if you get around to playing it, we could chat about this game for like a full episode of Safe Room and delve into like this being an example of utilizing genre in an unconventional way, but it actually like complementing the experience overall.
Well, I just bought it halfway through you talking, so
There you go.
that's it. I mean, mainly because I'm quite fascinated by this subgenre of like taking gambling games and making them games, because the big thing of that would be, well, what's the point? You know, like you're not getting the reward out of it, so it's making the risk reward something different, and it's interesting to do that in a video game form, because video games, unfortunately, are very much tied to gambling because of everything like you see, and especially in the bigger spaces, in terms of stuff we've seen like loot boxes and gachas and stuff like that. So, kind of depicting it as inherently evil and having such life or death things, it's satire in a sense, I suppose. But I do like that idea of game, because I really enjoyed last year's Billionaire, which is basically pachinko gone roguelike. And I've always before the jokes about Konami and pachinko, I used to love the game of pachinko. It was a game of chance, but any game that kind of does that stuff, whether it be Peggle or that, just really I found it quite interesting. But yeah, I've seen a few games like this. I mean, I suppose Buckshot Roulette is probably like the game that's kind of branched these things out and made people go, "Oh, we could do this, or you could do that," sort of thing, and like that's great. And yeah, I think as a concept, like a slot machine doing it works wonders. Yeah, so yeah, I'm very interested to check that out. Probably after we've done these episodes, if it's not too late. We'll see.
Well, yeah, make sure you've got some time, because if you are taken with it like I was, it might be a late night or an early morning, depending on how deep into the weeds you get with it.
Yeah, that's it. Might save it for tomorrow. Think about it.
I'll just say, if this was on mobile, I would be in trouble, because I'd probably get spoken to at work about playing that when I shouldn't be. But that's going to
Steam Deck.
there you go, brother. The amount of stuff that I am contemplating buying right now, Steam Deck's at the top of the list. So we'll see if that's in store for me in the new year. But we're going to get right into your number 9 pick.
I have a feeling it might be on your list. Doom: The Dark Ages.
That is on my list, and we will be tackling that later this episode.
There you go. Okay, so yeah, that's my number 9. So what's your number 9?
All right, my number 9 is going to be Chronos: The New Dawn.
Which, guess what, is on my list, which we will also cover later this episode.
Perfect. All right, so that'll get us to your number 8 pick,
which is Silent Hill F.
Perfect. I have not made it to that game yet this year, unfortunately. That's going to be a holiday pick for me. So why don't you go ahead and tell me why this game made your list?
Okay, so obviously after Silent Hill 2 Remake kind of made fans of the series a bit more comfortable about the whole thing returning, Silent Hill F comes out, first big brand new Silent Hill game since Downpour in 2013. A game which played a part in cementing that whole series' reputation as a dying one. Obviously, the PD stuff happened in between, but that's just more examples, if we're honest. It's a departure from mainline entries in terms of like taking out of America, and now it's in like 1960s Japan. But to the developer Neobard's credit, it's the most that any game in the series has felt like a traditional Silent Hill since like the first 4, I think. Like I think it's down to the structure, like the subtleties that we've talked about in earlier Silent Hill games, in terms of what you learn in the background of stuff, and on multiple levels, like in terms of like the psychological horror of it, like the personal horror, the body horror, just all the things that we normally associate with manifestations of feelings and emotions, guilt, etc. That's all here, but the structure here is that you play the game through once, you have an idea of what the story is, blah blah blah, go for all that. But it's meant to be played multiple times, much like say like Nier Automata was. And each time you replay the game, like certain scenes will be add a slightly different context, or there'll be different lines, or there'll be different things entirely in those scenes because of stuff you learned from the last one. So, and then you have to do specific things each run to find out more, to effectively find the true ending. And that in itself, like I think once I got to the end of the first playthrough and like the hook of what that was, I was, my mind was already racing with like, oh, okay, so what could this mean? What could that mean? And and having theories in your head because I kept away from all the spoiler stuff as and all the discussion about the game at that point. And yeah, seeing that sort of play out and like the small things, and the game that's about like 10 hours or so each time, like get to the next playthrough and you think, oh, maybe, will I even notice the differences like that? But they're subtle, but they're enough that they matter. And I think because it's a game world that you can't help but pay attention to the details in because it fucking looks gorgeous. You have this great appreciation for what's going on in it, and you're invested in it. Absolutely, and I think in terms of world building, it is honestly like playing an old school Silent Hill game, and just reminds you how far we went from that. It's so different from like what Bloober Team did in so many ways because it's much more streamlined, like those older games. Like it's there's pathways that are alternate and stuff like that, but it's not open world to the degree that game was. Where you are just going like all around the place. So it does play more like a traditional survival horror of like, go back here, go back there, but it's split into sections and you are having truncated bits. So it does feel like a throwback game in many ways, and I think that helps in terms of like the development of it, where it can look as good as it does and play out the story the way it does, and it gives the developer more control over that. So as a result of that, combat is it's not great. Which in those earlier games was the same things, and that's because generally the protagonists aren't really that kind of protagonist. So that's fine, but it's less about like what you can do. I think it's more about the situations the game puts you in sometimes, which annoy me, and you end up getting a bit aggrieved with that. And it's the dread you feel coming back to those sections, which isn't the oh god, I'm terrified sort of dread, but like when you have to replay the game, it's like, oh, I've got to do this bit again. Like there's a stretch near the end where I was very, very, very cross with the game, and which will come up in another game later, I think, when talking about certain sections. But it was worth persevering because, as a story, it is fantastic. I mean, it's probably one of the best stories in any of the games that I've played this year. Absolutely. And in Hinako, the protagonist is again one of the strongest protagonists we've had since that time as well. I mean, undoubtedly the strongest we've had since that original bunch. So yeah, I do like the structure to a degree. I mean, once I discovered that it was like you've got to replay this game multiple times to get the story, I had flashbacks to the Nier Automata thing, which was like everyone loves this game because it does this, and I hate that it does this sort of thing, like like really badly, and like that. And yes, there's a bit of that that annoyed me. But yeah, I think there's stuff in it that shows that it's still like a burgeoning idea that needed a bit, could have been done on a higher scale. But the story is not one of those places. Absolutely not. It is fantastic. But yeah, it's Silent Hill is back. There's no doubt about that.
Well, yeah, you leading with the setting, like that was the most intriguing aspect of Silent Hill F, right? Because of the fact that not only, you're leaving the North America, but more importantly, I wanted to see how that sort of like framework of Silent Hill, because this is not the first game to not be literally based in Silent Hill. But I was interested to see how the sort of like identity of what we're used to with Silent Hill, how that could be applied to, not only a new setting, but more importantly, in the case of Silent Hill F, like the cultural difference, right? And
Yeah.
so like the notion that you could have a Silent Hill experience play out in a way that is representative of what Silent Hill is known for, but at the same time, like The Stranger in a Strange Land, for at least for in terms of you and I playing a game such as this occurring in an Asian country, and so that was ultimately what was most exciting about Silent Hill F. But in terms of like the approach to combat, that was also something that I think I was interested in because as we've chatted about ad nauseum, Silent Hill for us is not very notable for the combat. And so I was really interested to see and, now to hear from you, like specifically about the combat and sort of like the flavor of combat and the advancements that maybe have been made or haven't been made in terms of this new chapter of Silent Hill. And so, while maybe combat is still not the like definitive selling point, would you say that combat is at least whether it's more refined or it's presented in a way that kind of like it basically what I'm trying to ask is combat as much of a sticking point here as it has been in past games? There's certain, it sounds like sections that maybe kind of like gave you pause, but would you say that overall it's been improved?
I mean, mechanically, it's more like a video game now. Like the earlier games were definitely more like, well, we got to have it. It's kind of, I suppose my problem with it is that at first it really does feel like it doesn't fit the kind of game it is because it's very Dark Souls-esque in terms of like how you lock on, smack things, wait for the moment, sort of wait for your hit, and it's not survival horror in the sense of you can't avoid things as much. You have to pretty much take some things on, and yet the weapon degradation, which is intense to some degree, but it's still annoying at times. When you can't really sort of find another weapon, and I don't know. But once you get into the rhythm of it and learn enemy patterns, which are they are limited to a degree, you're not going to get surprised once you know. It's more about the context of when you face things. And I think the stretch I was sort of talking about, it was all these different enemies which require different things to do at different times, and like it's like I hate that stuff. It's like I hate the overwhelming sort of like thing for it, and I can't help but hate that. That's again, there's another game on this list I will say that had similar problems, and that's fine. But the combat itself is fine. I think it is, like I said, simple enough that you get into a rhythm of it. It's just very weird at first to be playing a Silent Hill game where you are basically dodging and parrying effectively. Silent Hill games.
Concepts that I never thought I would hear associated with that, but at the same time, as is the case with another major franchise installment this year, parrying is a massive, massive part of the experience. I guess my last question for Silent Hill F: how is the monster enemy design? Is there a good variety there? Is it how does it kind of like does it utilize, I suppose, this new setting? Because we were very intrigued to see like the fungal aspect that was introduced in that initial Silent Hill F trailer and seeing how that would be sort of like representative of monsters and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it does that great job of like having a very particular identity in terms of the enemies, where they all follow the basic idea of this sort of red rock plant style to it, but they're different enough when it matters. Like there's variations on themes, so you have the sort of marionette style sort of knife wielding women, and there's different versions of those, and there's big bloater type ones like fused between like being flesh and plant and weaponry, and there's even like a supernatural element to it in certain enemies, and like interpretations of like different stuff in the monsters as well, which again are all the best thing about Silent Hill games when monsters are like this is like, oh, well, it's okay, so what does this mean to do with the story? And because you get that layers and layers to the story, you start to understand why monsters are a certain way, why they look a certain way beyond the obvious ones like that. And I suppose the best thing about it is that you, unlike Silent Hill games post 4, I suppose, you don't get the let's just put this one in from that game for the hell of it sort of thing, which is a relief. And there's actual effort, there's actual effort made to make these monsters fit what's going on to a degree. And also just to add to that as well, there's some body horror stuff in here, especially in cutscenes, that is like, what the fuck? Yeah, like there's a section in this game which is just like jaw dropping in terms of like, what the fuck sort of thing like happening right now. And it's that moments like that just make you think, yes, brilliant. This is Silent Hill doing what it does best.
Well, I think you've just basically established that we will be covering this game for sure in the new year, because this is probably my most egregious oversight of the year, because of the fact that I just had one too many things to play, couldn't make this happen. But I certainly sounds like I fucked up, because I definitely need to play this in the new year, and it sounds like we'll have a lot to chat about. So I'm looking forward to that inevitable conversation. But before we continue our lists, we're going to take a quick break, get that out of the way, so we can come back and dive into more of our picks, and especially the ones that we've skipped already, which so far not terrible compared to last year. I feel like last year we had an egregious amount of skips up front. So I think we're off to a pretty good start. But we'll dive into those and much more when we come back from our break in a moment.
This episode is brought to you by McAfee. I found this great place to stay this weekend.
Click on the link and book it.
Oh, wow. McAfee alerted me that this site is fake and even blocked it. Cybercriminals create fake sites to steal your passwords and financial data. McAfee identifies and blocks these sites to keep you safer online, so you can book your trip without worry. Learn more at McAfee.com/online protection.
This episode is brought to you by Nature's Bounty. Nature's Bounty believes your body is brilliant, naturally designed to thrive, inside and out. For those always looking for new ways to support your health from head to heels, Nature's Bounty has a range of over 400 vitamins and supplements born from 50 years of trust and care. Nature's Bounty. It's in your nature. Visit naturesbounty.com to learn more.
The McDonald's Snack Wrap is back. You brought it back. Ranch Snack Wrap. Spicy Snack Wrap. You broke the internet. For a snack. Snack Wrap is back. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
And we're back from our break, and now it's time for me to share my number 8 pick, which is going to be Horses from developer Santa Ragione. Did you have this one on your list?
It did not make my short list.
Okay, so perfect. Again, we're tracking pretty well compared to past episodes. So for my number 8, it's Horses, probably the most notorious game of the year, because of the fact that this is a game that at this point, has been beaten to death. The talking point of it being banned from Steam and the Epic Games Store. It was banned from Humble for a minute, and then they reinstated it. But as I will briefly touch upon, because I think that this is a game that we will certainly be revisiting in the new year, because I think it definitely is deserving of a full episode to delve into what makes this quite a notable game, and clearly my number 8 pick for favorites of the year. So Horses is a game that I went into completely blind. I'll preface by saying that. So my experience with it, I think, is a little bit more unique, but at the same time, I don't think that necessarily is necessary. It's necessarily necessary. It's not necessary to fully enjoy this. So we had chatted a few years ago about Santa Ragione's game Saturnalia, which was a very culturally immersive and visually unique survival horror game. And so just based off of our experience and chat with that, I was like, yeah, I'm going to play Horses no matter what this developer decides to release or, publish with another developer after that. And that is partially why, the content found in this game I found to be very shocking. Now, most people, given the amount of coverage around the taboo and extreme, in some instances, subject matter, might not, because again of how heavily it's been reported. But basically, this is a game where you're playing as a despondent college student, Anselmo, who is forced at the behest of their parents to endure 2 weeks of manual labor on a farm. This farm initially presents as being sort of like an odd, but at the end of the day, like tranquil retreat from your studies. But then it becomes very apparent, and I guess I will give a spoiler warning here, but at the same time, again, this has been widely reported. Spoilers in 3, 2, 1. The host of your weekend or 2 weeks at the farm basically introduced you to his prized herd of horses. Now, when I say prized herd of horses, what I mean is a stable that's full of naked and enslaved men and women that have horse masks fastened with metal collars to their necks. So, yes, horses is not very, I suppose, subtle in its imagery and the themes and thematics there within. However, this game I found to be, very nuanced in its use of exploring these thematics because of the fact that, thanks to the director of the game, Andrea Luco Barella, he's someone that has a background in film studies, and I think that is very apparent from playing horses because of the sort of cinematic techniques that are utilized within this game. Now, I reviewed this for my blog Save Scum, but like this is a game that initially kind of presents as what I would say is like, okay, this initially seems like a game that was directed by someone that like had a crash course weekend of watching A24 films. It's like, yeah, it's in black and white. It not only abides by like a silent film approach in that no one speaks, but it's got silent film cards and whatnot. And, those are aspects of film that we've seen trickle into games that I think already have sort of like been used abundantly by people that don't necessarily understand that if you're going to utilize techniques like that, you need to have it be in service of something larger than just like, hey, I think this makes my game look cool. And Horses, in my opinion, is definitely a game that understands how to properly utilize those things because it actually has something to say. And ultimately, utilizing those features is not like the end all be all of the experience. So ultimately, like once you have that big reveal of, okay, this farm is fucking crazy. This farmer is out of his mind. This is incredibly a fucked up situation that only becomes more fucked up. The game just continues after that. That's within the first 10 minutes of the experience. And, it is what allows this game to carry itself as surreally as it does, is that you have this big reveal and then the screen cuts to black and you wake up the next morning. It says there's 13 days left of your stint at the farm and it's business as usual. The game doesn't immediately end. You don't immediately plot your escape. It's just business as usual. And so that, I think, is like the biggest key to why the different sort of like cinematic techniques and inevitably what makes Horses feel like an example of like expressionist cinema. It's why this works so well because of the fact that the player, as much as Anselmo is like made to feel like the odd man out, you feel like the odd man out. You meet other people in this world that it's like, yeah, there's people here that are essentially chattel, and it's never blatantly addressed. And I think that ultimately is the aspect of the approach to world building and storytelling for Horses that is so strong. And, for as much has been said about this game and its extreme content and subject matter, those are not the things that make this game stand out to me amongst the year. I really do think it is Barella's approach to, again, like those cinematic techniques and the portrayal of the world, this artistic medium, rather than the like acts of egregious violence and torture and slavery and all these things. which, is what the brunt of the sort of notoriety around horses has been about. So I suppose before I delve a little bit more into this one, and as we talked about before the show, we'll definitely be chatting about this in more depth in the beginning of next year. Like, how did you find horses? Because I know it didn't make your list, but you had played this one.
Yeah, and like I said, it's just the sheer competition with this one. And I suppose it's like anything like this, when you hear controversy, you're like, well, yeah, I always roll my eyes anyway, because like, yeah, in the world of film, in the world of anything, in books even, there is stuff that is like miles worse, than anything in this. But it's because games get babied, and they still do to this day. There's a whole bunch of people in power in different places that think games should be one thing, or they should be, well, one of two things. They should be pandering to little children, or they shouldn't exist, and that's it. And anytime you get this, we've seen it throughout history. We talked about this only earlier this year. Games get banned because people don't like the idea of you playing things like this, like playing things, having an interactive role in a story is different. There's no denying that. It's like, this might be tamer than, say, Lars von Trier's The House That Jack Built, but it's still, to actually play through something like that, that's a bit more disturbing, like that. I suppose the cinematic framing of it is what makes it interesting. It is because that's how people are going to treat it. It's like more like cinema in terms of, and I think that is one of the great qualities about this, is the way it's shot, just the way it approaches its subject matter. It's so weirdly matter of fact that I think that's what's riled people. People that actually have played it and are upset by it, which is probably very few. It's as usual, it is people who haven't played it, who are assuming based on something they've seen or read somewhere. But yeah, I think there's a really interesting and bold approach to what they're doing here, and that can't be denied, like that. No, it's not as shocking if you're into, extreme cinema or something. Like I said, I've read books that have been more upsetting in terms of like content, but that doesn't mean it's not impactful. I think there's plenty in it that really does just get to the heart of this weird situation, and without being preachy in what it's doing, which is, again, very, very difficult. As you said, games have tackled all sorts of subject matter, and I think you only have to think back to like 20 odd years ago with Manhunt and all the furore about that, about how violent it is. It's like, well, yes, it's but the underlying thing about what made that an excellent game was, yes, it knows that. That's the point. Like that. It's the endurance of violence, and how far you're willing to push it for survival in that case, and playing on Rockstar's reputation as being like the violence betas of the industry. And I think there's no harm in that, in the same way there isn't any harm with it in cinema, or in books, or in art. You can look to push buttons. It doesn't mean you're trying to be edgy. It doesn't mean you're trying to do anything like just to make a quick buck, because that's the opposite thing here for the developer. Like, yes, you get a certain amount of notoriety, and obviously the exposure that Horses has got is helped to a degree. But it's still going to affect the reputation of the developer. I mean, for very different reasons. We saw this back with the developers Red Candle, who made Detention with their game Devotion, who, when they innocently placed like joke at the expense of someone high in power, ended up getting killing them for a while as a developer. They were on the brink of things. And art should be allowed to express itself. It is the great unfortunate irony of the modern day, is that you can't. Like there's all this talk about freedom of speech, but it's really not for everyone. That's the idea. It's like freedom. I want to be mean, fine. You want to do this, no, like that. It's a twisted sort of moral code that just ends up punishing developers, like that. And that's a wider problem, which I'm sure we'll get into again, even in this episode or the next episode. that it's just ridiculous that we have to explain this to people about horror games or games with like horrific content.
Yeah, I think that this will be a larger discussion that we have when we inevitably chat about this game in the new year. But yeah, all of the notoriety surrounding horses is, in my opinion, and sounds like in your opinion, completely unfounded, and is another example of, or one of the more recent examples, unfortunately, of artistic expression being basically censored by major platforms such as Steam and whatnot. We unfortunately saw this also with Vile Exhumed, which I'm sure is going to crop up at some point. No reason why I would think that. Vile Exhumed, yeah, not this week for sure. But Vile Exhumed being a game that was unjustly banned from all platforms to the degree that the developer and publisher Dread XP decided that they were going to release it for free because they're like, we believe in this product, this game so heavily that this shit deserves to be seen and played by everyone. And so, it was inevitably released for free. And, much like in the case with that game, here with horses, like while the content is more graphic and the subject matter, as if not more in some instances disturbing, like this is actually, I don't want to make that claim that as or is it's also disturbing. Not that we're going to rank disturbing content matter, but my point being like, there's nothing found in horses that is not in line with 17 or 18 plus adult media. And I think that, it being sort of like dragged out as being this piece of media that needs to be barred from sale is just like the latest example of basically people operating under this guise of protectors of moral decency, when in actuality, there's nothing in this game you haven't seen if, again, you have played M-rated games or watched R-rated films. Like you mentioned, if somebody like Vars Von Trier or Gaspar Noé are capable of making films that are R-rated, granted they both have unrated films, but I'm talking about R-rated films that they've made, there's nothing in this game that you have not seen, or nothing in this game that it is going to be affecting. It is not going to be as traumatic or a detriment to moral decency as people are making it out to be online. So that being said, that's a conversation that I'm sure we'll have at a later point. But yeah, I would say that Horses is the most transgressive game that I played this year. And I think that it serves as another great example of the importance of art being uncomfortable. Art should be uncomfortable. If art is not uncomfortable, or people shy away from making art that makes people uncomfortable, then art is going to lose its potency because of the fact that you need to be able to have uncomfortable conversations, uncomfortable reflections on society, our own experiences in the world, others' own experiences in the world, because that's the beauty of games and the medium of games, and getting to have this other vessel for exploring stories and the people that those stories are about. And so, yeah, that's why Horses was my number 8 pick for the year. And yeah, that'll lead us right into your number 7 pick.
Which is a game you've already brought up, I believe, is Chronos: The New Dawn. Which
look at that.
Which, of course, we didn't speak about together because it was a rare episode where I was not here. So
yes, I chatted about that. I chatted about that with friend of the show, Aaron Baim. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to chop it up with you about this one.
Yeah, it's a shame because I had such mixed thoughts on this game for so long, but it's still here. I mean, going back to what I was saying about my number 8 pick, of course, like Pluba Team made plenty of people eat their words with Silent Hill 2 remake, and basically restored its reputation, which, even as an ardent defender, like games like The Medium, games like Blair Witch, like really did not do them any favors as a developer for various reasons. And when we talk about controversial content, in games, The Medium is an example that didn't quite. It's interesting. Had that come out a few years later, we probably could have been having that conversation about that one. But yeah, the onus was still on the developer to sort of prove it could create an original horror game of the kind of quality that Silent Hill 2 remake was. Because that would be the excuse forever. Would be like, oh, well, no, you only made a good game because you had the backing of great people like that who made this game and they babied you through it, and that's the only way it was good, the sort of thing. Which, I'm sure it helped, having like the people behind the original game helping you out, but they definitely made it their own. There's no doubt about that. Now, Kronos is not without its issues, I think, but I do think it represents the developer's biggest swing at making a game that's their own, and I think as a result has probably established a brand new survival horror series. I don't see there not being a sequel to this at some point. I know they'll obviously be busy going back to the Silent Hill franchise, but they were doing that before, and suddenly, oh yeah, we're also making another game, sort of thing, and that turned out to be this. I mean, a sci-fi horror game, which is always interesting. The comparison points are obvious. Yes, it's very Dead Space. Yes, it's got bits. Literally has locations from the medium and stuff like that because it's the same sort of Polish settings. But structurally, it flips between like a far-flung future and this horrifying past. Where some cataclysmic event caused all these people to die and all this horrible stuff to happen, these monsters to exist, and you basically are taking these trips into the past to sort of basically as a sort of weird sort of archaeologist, if you will, like excavating data from people and places to reasons that aren't initially clear, but become clearer as you go. But the cool thing about that is that on both sides of that, there's a mystery, in both those things. There's a mystery about what happened then, and there's a mystery about why you're doing what you're doing now. Like there's simple explanations to begin with, but they're not going to be simple explanations. And this is where much of the game kind of teeters on that balance of like the worry that are Bloober Team going to pull this off? Are they going to actually pull off an original story? Because while they've been very good at sort of technical achievements and really clever sort of visual trickery, the thing you could probably criticize them the most in recent sort of probably in their entire history is that the writing hasn't always been great like that. It has been clunky, not really very horror 101 in some places, and it's been propped up by what they do as games. And in the worst examples, like Blair Witch, neither do well. But this, like they really like care about making a big swing of a story, and like time hopping sci-fi horror is like something that's very hard to fuck with. And it's not trying to be like massively highbrow with it. I mean, it's sincere about what it's doing. It knows its limitations, much the same way that Silent Hill F feels big just because of how it looks. I think it's smart use of what technology they have to make something appear bigger than it is, which is what all great sort of survival horror games did back in the day, where they feel much bigger than they are. And that's just by the way you design your world, the way that you write your world, and everything in it. And they've absolutely knocked out the park in that regard. I think it's a really compelling story. I think the mystery aspect of it like feels sensible, it doesn't feel like it's wildly out of shape for what it's doing. And the storytelling and the level design is just like high level stuff. You can tell the work they did on Silent Hill 2 really helped them understand certain things like that and really sort of nail certain tones and grooves of how to approach a story. And I think when the developer looks back on this sort of period, there's so much that will be enriched by the experience they've gone through, in much the same way that it did when they were making their initial games and they were like really kicked to death, for how bad they were, and they learned, went back, remade that game with new stuff and improved it, and then from that went on, made Layers of Fear and became a bigger deal, and then they basically went through that cycle again to Silent Hill 2, and it's just they've done fantastic. So we've talked a lot about Bloober and how it's changed and how much how it really stepped up to the plate. And even as a very smug person who was like, told you so about Silent Hill 2, and it was still somewhat of a surprise that it was really as good as it was. But yeah, to then follow up with something brand new, I'm always going to be happy if it's like an ambitious swing and they do enough good in it where I'm like, yes, this is great in what they're doing. What's not so great is the difficulty curve in this game is fucking maddening at times. Like, it's a survival horror, all right, because it doesn't really explain to you at all where you're going to need stuff. So you can be caught with your trousers down really badly, like in so many occasions. Like, I mean, there's a section I had ranted about, I think, on social media, like in the basement, in the morgue of a hospital.
Yes.
Where because the enemies like replicate and regenerate and all this stuff like that, if you don't do certain things, it just makes the situation hard. Now, when I got to that point, I had limited resources because of the stuff just before it. And of course, you can't just go back and get more stuff in the traditional sense. So, yeah, I had to basically like grind that thing out, find a way that worked. And God, I spent more on that section than I did entire section, like whole like segments of the game like that. And yeah, I feel riled up just thinking about it again. But it was like there are smaller examples of that in the game, but once I experienced that, none of them felt like anything after that. And my end solution really was, I hate to say, to restart the game, like from the beginning. Yeah, because I just looked at it and thought, I've really enjoyed what I've played, and there are some bad bits to it. But I think if I'm being fair, and this is true of other games I've played in the past, if I replay from the start with the knowledge of what kind of game this actually is in terms of what it will and won't tell you, I will have a better time with it, and I will be more prepared for the moments that come up. And you know what? I was, and it really became a much better experience. And I can praise it a bit more that the game is like that, and you don't feel like you're being telegraphed what's coming next in that sense. Like the level design gives it away that something's going to happen here, like, but you don't. Yeah, you're not prepared in the normal sense of like, oh, here's a bunch of stuff you might need for what's coming up. Yeah, because of the way you sort of create stuff and craft stuff, it's difficult like that. But yeah, so that's a big crux of it, and I think if you can get past that frustration, you really just tap into the rich vein of what this game is. So yeah, long-winded, but yeah, it's a game that persevered through its frustrations.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with your take on it, which is reflected in the chat that I had with Aaron. I think that it was great to see Bloober continue this sort of like redemptive arc, if you will, after something like The Medium, which took some big swings and severely, in certain regards or aspects to the storytelling there within with that game. Now, what I think allows Chronos to work as well as it does, first and foremost, is that this is a game that not only visually looks stunning, but more importantly, I think it has a really great sort of cinematic approach to presenting its world. It has this visual flair that I think has very much drawn influence, and people have said as much since the game's release. It being akin to something like 12 Monkeys. There's some directorial aspects of it that make it resemble 2001: A Space Odyssey, which those are both two films that if you're doing space horror, that's definitely, or sci-fi horror, those are definitely movies you want referenced. I found that ultimately, like, the presentation of the world is as important as it is, the actual narrative there within that is following, the outbreak, both pre and post. And, it's always cool to see a studio that can visit the world of other games that they've made in whatever they're currently releasing. But you honestly, like throughout all of Chronos, you can feel the developers, I suppose, like their enthusiasm, but also their confidence that was gained from doing the Silent Hill remake. And really, it is the best example, I think, of a studio that's done a game that, most people, or, the loudest people on the internet, don't want to, give them too much credit, but they said this could never work. The studio, specifically the studio, could never do it. And Bloober Team basically, said, okay, you think that? Watch. And then delivered something that was miles better than what we thought it would be when you're talking about, a remake of one of the most beloved games of all time, which we've chatted about at length. Now, where that funnels into Chronos is that this is a game that, while a lot of people, and, I even said as much on the podcast, like, what's the obvious reference point? Dead Space. By my estimation, I would say that Chronos has more of a survival horror influence to it than Dead Space, which I consider to be survival horror action. And I think that for me, what does that, and you spoke to it, and it's probably one of the few aspects of this game we disagree on, like the learning curve, or the difficulty curve rather. Like, yes, there are several points in the first 5 hours of this game. There's, it might be a handful or just a little less than that, where I was like, fuck this. This is punishingly difficult. The first time you explore an apartment complex's basement and you're walking through and, it's nothing basically to get to the key card or the key that you need. And then on, when you're trying to leave, you're trying to egress, there's, 5 or 6 different of the enemies that basically will explode out of these stalls that are down in the basement. And that part fucking threw me for a loop. It was so goddamn difficult. It frustrated me to no end. I probably spent 20 minutes on it. And then it really, though, for me, reinforced the notion of like, I was not prioritizing the crafting system enough. And that's so obvious because if a game has crafting, you're collecting materials. Like, yeah, you should be utilizing those. But I found that like those difficulty bumps, if you will, those were the moments that I needed to kind of like remind myself that, hey, you're not playing Dead Space, asshole. That was to me. Like, it's this notion that you really need to be utilizing each facet of the mechanics there within. And that doesn't mean that there were certainly not sections where I still was thrown for a loop and still felt a couple of times like I was banging my head against the wall. But ultimately, I found that those moments were exposing a weakness in my approach to certain sections of the game and whatnot. Once combat clicked for me after that, I found that I had a much greater appreciation for combat and the approach there within. And, I think ultimately, like, for as cool as the direction is, as cool as the environments are, I fucking love the enemy design, by the way. I need to do a sidebar there. Like you might be able to say like, well, they're kind of like the necromorphs, this or that, but where the necromorphs in Dead Space were always promoted as being like creatures that, you really have to stay on top of. You have to dismember them, otherwise they'll come back to life. Or you really need to take out one certain type of necromorph because it can spawn new necromorphs from corpses. Like, no, that was very far and few between instances of that in Dead Space. And I found that in Chronos, almost every single encounter that had more than 2 or 3 enemies really felt like a fight for my life every single time. Not only because of the fact that you might be dealing with like one of those heavy hitter, let's call them elite enemies, but you are going to come across basic, what would normally be fodder enemies that are able to become stronger because they'll consume other enemies of, or suppose in their case, allies that you've already killed. If you don't burn their corpses, they'll literally get stronger. And that aspect of the enemy AI I found was something that, it felt punishing at times, but it was always because I had not properly prioritized decisions in combat. It's like, okay, I'm in this big environment. I'm fighting 5 guys. If I kill 2 of them, I need to immediately go over there and like flame their corpses. Otherwise, these remaining 3 are going to be even harder than the 2 that I just killed. And so like for reasons that pertain to that, I found that, once I kind of had a grasp on combat, Chronos: The New Dawn survival horror elements really clicked with me in a way that I think allow it to separate itself from, again, those comparisons to Dead Space. You might be able to say, like, I suppose I will say the only thing about that game that still gives me pause, and it's why, I had it at number 9, was that a lot of what's in Chronos, I felt like, you can draw clear reference points, which is not a huge knock, right? You can say that about almost anything, but I think for me, I would have liked to have seen this really phenomenal presentation be applied to a facet of gameplay that I had not seen anywhere else. And that's not to say what they draw influence from is not really expertly handled. It makes me excited for the notion of a sequel after, the Silent Hill remake that is coming. But at the end of the day, I want them to take a bigger risk with the sequel in this universe that is immaculately presented and is one of my favorite games of the year.
Yeah, I kind of hope they take the tech they use for the medium, with the split screen effectively for different, dimensions. Using
Absolutely.
that again would work so well. I think in Chronos, like in terms of like just having dual timelines or something. Even in a single player environment would just be just fantastic. And yeah, it's kind of fascinating that you say all that and you had the game lower than I have mine. But it's like, but yeah, I think that's just a general affection for Bloober Team and what they do and what they've come through to get to this point that does that. Yeah, I think it's telling. And I think what you were saying about like the monsters and the difficulty of like even the smallest ones, it kind of makes sense for the world. Like when you think of many game worlds, are like, oh, this race took over the world in X amount of time, and you fight them and you go, how? Like that sort of thing. Like that. But here it's like, yeah, this feels like, yeah, if I can't fucking handle these right well, then Jesus, yeah, like it's gonna be yeah, it's no wonder that it went wrong, sort of thing. So yeah, they feel believable in that regard, and it is nice to be kept on your toes. I suppose it's just that structure. Maybe it could be better in terms of like making that work. I mean, another game actually reminded me of was Hollow Body. Yeah, just in terms of like, because it's obviously that's British and this is obviously set in Poland. It's that sort of European feel to it. That's where it feels very unique to Dead Space, is because it's more grounded, literally, and that gives it this extra sort of flavor. But yeah, the way they sort of implement the sci-fi as well is interesting. Like that in terms of like the technology and like the time differences, meaning you can do different things with the world. And yeah, I'd very much like that. So yeah, good pick, I think, all around.
Definitely one of the highlights of the year. But that is going to lead us to my number 7 pick, which is Skin Freak.
Which is my number 6. So there you go. So that's nicely done. So you can go because why not?
All right. Yeah. So Skin Freak is the latest game from a developer that we've covered extensively, and we are both noted massive fans of, that being Black Eyed Priest, aka Jordan King. And so in Skin Freak, this a game where naturally you find people that find themselves in an unfortunate situation of being up against, whether it is supernatural or otherwise. In this case, Skin Freak, you are faced against a serial killer that is basically running free within this mega office complex that, I think is best described as like Nakatomi Plaza, but with a more technological slant to it. And so, while you are trying to avoid this serial killer, this is a game that I found, again, which has been the case with all of Black Eyed Priest games that we've covered. This is a game where I see a developer that is continually growing. It being whether the approach to storytelling, the approach to the types of gameplay experiences that are being provided, being, the scope and the size of the experience, like going from Night of the Gates of Hell to Sniper Killer to now Skin Freak, like each one of those has a distinctly different influence, whether that be playing out in the gameplay or the specific type of horror film sort of like identity that the game is utilizing to tell, whether it's story or informing its gameplay. And so, Skin Freak, I think, is again like such a fantastic example of that, in that this game basically moves on from the sniping of Sniper Killer to an immersive sim that has giallo elements to it, which is phenomenal. I think with I believe it was Puppet Combo Stay Out of the House, that kind of like established immersive sim underneath this Puppet Combo umbrella. But rather than just basically doing exactly what Puppet Combo did, Black Eyed Priest took that immersive sim nature and really ramped up the scale to, fuck Stay Out of the House. Like, let's tackle a whole apartment building or a whole office complex. And, in that regard, I found it to be an experience that is much larger, but at the same time, the systems there within are made more complex. But at the same time, like in that complexity, it kind of just reveals like this is a developer that understands the strengths of both the horror film genres that it's drawing its influence from, but also like fundamentally understands the gameplay methodology that it's embarking on with an immersive sim. So again, like the variety of gameplay experiences here is really impressive. The game begins with this lengthy, basically prologue where you're playing a taxi cab driver and you've got this extended segment of driving around a city and picking up these weird patrons, which again, the humor of a Black Eyed Priest game is always like front and foremost, right? You're picking up weirdos, you're picking up oddballs that are engaged in various nefarious late night activities, old ladies trying to pay buttons for their fare. And then at the same time, weird people that are involved in various, salacious activities underneath bridges. Let's just leave it at that. But then like that gives way to, again, this immersive sim aspect of the game where you're going through this building. There's no immediate threat, but you're just trying to navigate a series of environmental puzzles through exploration and collecting key items. Basically, the end goal is that you're trying to install security updates on a variety of computers, but you have to basically solve puzzles to, get there. And then, in the back half of the game, it turns into a stealth section where you're trying to avoid the killer. And then there's a lengthy combat section. And so it just continually impressed me that this is a game, as we chatted about in our full Safe Room episode covering it, that continually like reinvents itself, but at each step of the way, when it introduces like a new facet of the experience, both in Skin Freak, but also amongst Black Eyed Priest's catalog, it's just like, it feels like the most refined version that gets down to like the essence of the importance of that genre, if you will. And at the same time, like there are still those rough edges that make it a Black Eyed Priest game or a Torture Star video production in terms of like weirdo characters, really sort of like childish humor at times or adolescent humor at times, but it all is in service of like this brand that they've basically been refining over the course of their catalog and whatnot. And I think that it would be easy for people at a surface glance to be like, Black Eyed Priest games or games that fall into that Torture Star publisher umbrella. It's like, yeah, these just feel like the offshoots of what Puppet Combo offers. When in actuality, like these games are just as, if not more in some instances, important to experience if you're a fan of Puppet Combo games, or they could be your introduction to them. So I think for those reasons, like Skin Freak was my number 7 pick, and it's easily my one of my favorite games of the year.
Yeah, I mean, it seems whatever Black Eyed Priest puts out, I end up loving it. So I think every single game has appeared in our end of year lists at this point. But I mean, as you said, it's the evolution of that formula of loving homages to scuzzy horror movies of the 70s and 80s. That, like, when it was, all the flavor, now it's become some of it, and becoming more of a game, I suppose, in terms of like more mechanics to it and more things to it. I mean, as you said, on a small scale, it's got immersive sim elements, but also more like classic survival horror, in terms of like go to point A, point B. One of several games that got me to start replaying Prey again, funnily enough, just because of the ultimate workplace horror that is. I think what's interesting about this as well is because of the nature of like the premise of this, like it's in a shitty town at night in the middle of the night, and you're in an empty office building. That makes sense. So you don't have to worry about too many like things that are like everyday things. And then out on the streets, it's fairly empty, bar the odd customer. And so it gives it a really eerie quality to any place you go, where you just feel the unnerving nature of being in a place that's normally populated but isn't. Which ironically, is one of the things that reminded me of Prey, which is like this is a place that should be full of humanity, but is not because something has happened to destroy that. And yeah, I really love the atmosphere of it, and just how even in this, the limited sort of visual set that they have, they've massively upgraded from what they were doing at the beginning with Bloodwash. At this point, even the character faces are like really well done now, and the voice work is just like evolving each time as well, and getting better and better and better without sacrificing that sort of cheesy charm that is supposed to evoke the kind of films that have inspired this. Yeah, and I suppose if you were to take it on the grand, up against like proper immersive sims, of course it's not going to compare. That's not the point. But it's in this context with this kind of game, with the kind of limitations it has, to be doing those things is like, wow, like that. Don't go expecting Deus Ex or anything here, but it is very much more about, and always has been, like, it's not recreating survival horror, it's recreating movies first and foremost in video game form. And even though there's more in the way of mechanics, it really does just drive home that sort of feel, like that technology that's slightly above what you would expect, but isn't really like massively impressive. Is like, I mean, Chopping Mall was the first thing that came to mind for me, like in terms of like that, and which just another reason why it endeared me greatly. But yeah, it's a great mix of things, and just again, game to game to game, just taking all the elements of each thing and really shaping them into something better and better each time.
Yeah, it's again like it's a reason why that this developer has popped up on our Game of the Year list now, seemingly I think it was like the last 2 years, because of the fact that, as we've said, they're able to utilize genre, both game and film wise, and utilize that to continually push themselves in a new direction. And I think, furthermore, providing an experience that within their catalog of games just feels so refreshing and exciting. And I mean, every time I finish one of these games, it's like, fuck, what are they going to do next? Which that's the best thing that, best kind of feeling that a game can leave you with. So yeah, very much look forward to seeing what Black Eyed Priest is doing next. And at the same time, like, it makes me excited to see what ultimately is coming next from whether Puppet Combo or something else underneath that umbrella. But it's why, that sort of like niche corner of horror is so widely regarded, because of the fact that, not to say that Puppet Combo is giving marching orders, but if Puppet Combo is including some type of direction with a specific game, it's like, oh, okay, cool. Even if that crops up in a game that's underneath that banner, it's not going to be presented in the same exact way that, the Puppet Combo did. So I think that's ultimately what makes that very exciting. But I suppose that leaves my number 6 pick, since Freak was your number 6. But before I divulge that and we start to wrap up part 1 of our Game of the Year coverage, let's run through each what our 10 through 7 picks were. So Neil, why don't you go first? Remind us and refresh our memories with what your picks were for 10, 9, 8, and 7 for Games of the Year.
Yeah, so my number 10 was Carnival from Beyond Boolean. My number 9 was Doom: The Dark Ages from id. My number 8 was Silent Hill F from Neobards. My number 7 was Blue Team's Chronos: The New Dawn.
And my number 10 was Clover Pit. My number 9 was Chronos: The New Dawn. My number 8 was Horses. My number 7 was Skin Freak. And my number 6 was a game that you had mentioned already on your list, but we have not chatted about yet, which anybody that's keeping track, it's a much surprise. Doom: The Dark Ages from id Software was my number 6 pick. Now, we have talked previously about our love of the Doom franchise and whatnot. And, we have mentioned previously that in terms of, post Doom 2016, you were not the biggest fan of Doom Eternal because of the fact that, it really does ramp up the speed of things. And I don't want to misquote you, but what were maybe the other shorthand reasons that, post Doom 2016, this sort of like reboot arc had not necessarily worked for you as it did for me, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, it was just the structure, which, some of that is still in the Dark Ages, but I think refined. But the verticality of it was not something I really enjoyed like that. I think Doom is best when it's, again, I'm going to make the grounded pun, but yeah, more grounded. It really is. That's not to say that you can't go a bit vertical, but I think that game was just trying to be something else. And it felt confused. And yeah, I didn't like the rhythm of it. The shooting didn't feel right for me. And yeah, I don't know, it felt plastic in a lot of ways, in a way that I can't quite, didn't feel like Doom in a way that, again, many of the things in that game are still in Doom: The Dark Ages, but I do think what changes it is the context in which they're used and the systems that surround them that make them not a problem in the same way. But like in any game, like you can have the same set of mechanics in 4 different games, but the way each approaches it can make you feel a very different way about them. Like that, like it's the packaging. It's always about the packaging. And I think Doom Eternal's packaging was just not right for it at all.
So I definitely enjoyed Doom Eternal more than you did. I will, concede that it's a game that in its erraticness, something is lost that was present in Doom 2016. But I think that, the reason why I had Doom: The Dark Ages on my list where I did was the fact that this feels like it is kind of like getting their footing back, if you will, from Doom Eternal, which, you're certainly not the only person that had an issue with that game, kind of like ratcheting up the twitchness, if you will, of that game to a degree that kind of like is almost a discredit to, the sort of like reboot of Doom. And for me, where the transition between Doom and Doom Eternal was very much like, okay, you're going from this more agile, but still in line with, previous Doom games. So you feel more like, a fighter jet. But in the transition between Doom Eternal to Doom: The Dark Ages is that you're going from a fighter jet to like a tank. That is ultimately, I think, what makes Doom: The Dark Ages work so well for me, in that, it is yet another shifting in terms of the sort of approach to combat, in that this is a game that is more about, as they notably said in the marketing, this is about standing and fighting, and seeing how id was able to take this new identity of Doom and apply it to that methodology and apply new abilities to the player to really reinforce that notion, I think is what makes Doom: The Dark Ages more than just what some people were speculating it to be before it was released, in being like, let's say a standalone expansion, or some people were saying it's like a reskin with this Dark Ages art style aesthetic to it. But I think that anybody that's played this game can say that, with a lot of confidence, like, no, it's a lot more than that, actually. I will say, first and foremost, just to get that out of the way, this is basically like, as Doom has always been well-versed in like black metal aesthetic, this game is by and far the, black metal album cover come to life, right? There's so much personality in exploring the Dark Ages like time period and influence here, but it's never at the detriment of what has always been, you know, with the reboot of Doom, this kind of like futuristic, even more futuristic aspect of Doom. It just has this really cool tint to it, which is reflected in monster redesigns. But again, even there, it's more than that. It's not just that some of the monsters look different. It's that they actually behave different. Like thinking about like the Pinky Demon. The Pinky Demon now has a rider on top of him and has multiple sort of like, it's not shown, but like life bars. You have to kill the rider before you can kill the actual Pinky Demon. And the various attack patterns that enemies have that are classic enemies or classic demons returning are very different and require new strategy. But at the same time, there is this whole new bevy of demons of varying difficulties that you have to contend with that are a reflection of this new aesthetic. Likewise with the weapons, right? The weapons are, you know, some of them are returning naturally, like a super shotgun, or you've got like the plasma rifle and these things. But you also have brand new weapons that are completely unique to the Dark Ages, which, you know, I'll get to the big one in a minute, but like you have basic melee weapons. You've got a flail now, you've got a mace, but you also have this like painkiller like spike gun called the Impaler or the Pulverizer, which basically is the coolest gun of the year. I'm going to come out and say that right now. Like uses crushed skull shards as projectiles, is so fucking cool and so devastating. And I think that ultimately, like, yeah, you can say that, sure, you're going to use the Dark Ages time period and reflect that in the aesthetic, but the notion that it's a simple reskinning, in my opinion, is anything but. I guess I'll let you say what you enjoyed about this, since it was on your list as well, before I get into the more specifics of why I had this game as high on my list as I did, up against, you know, all the other games that I mentioned so far on my list.
Well, I mean, I kind of alluded to it before. It's like it's closer to what Doom was, you know, like in a classic run and gun formula first, while still taking lessons from 2016 Eternal that were positive to take. As a franchise, I think we've been looking, you know, I think id probably have been looking to find the new groove of this franchise since Doom 2, really, and have really struggled to sort of settle on it. I mean, Doom 3 is different to Doom 2, is different to Doom 2016, is different to Doom Eternal, to Dark Ages. They're all doing something different. So again, that reskin thing is just daft because nothing has been the same about Doom. I mean, most id games are that way. You know, like Quake is notorious for being what the fuck different from game to game to game. So like until the fourth one, I think. I mean, the obvious thing here is like, as much as it's reached saturation point in 2025, I think the parry mechanic is just really well implemented here and so satisfying. And again, it's an audio visual thing. But yeah, I think what has been the standout thing from game to game to game since 2016 is that audio visual sort of feedback. And oof, yeah, I think this and like Clair Obscur have like really done great stuff with that parrying in games this year. But this is like my favorite. I think it plays like a rhythm action game, but it doesn't punish you like a rhythm action game if you set it right. You can tweak it accordingly to, you know, how you play. I love anything that has a musical feel to it, even though I haven't got the rhythm for music based games in that way. I am so fond of them, but I struggle because I don't have that. But because the accessibility options of this game are really good, I was able to play it the way that suited me and still feel like I was in tune with like the beat of this game. You know, it plays to this like thunderous sort of rhythm where, you know, the beat is punctuated by this clang of steel on skull constantly. And like I got so happy using like the flail, like just clang it made on parrying, and oh yeah, it's the most a game has felt like Bulletstorm for me since Bulletstorm, which is like again which was like it had agility to it, but it was still quite, you know, boots on the ground in terms of like how you played it. Really and you felt heavy. And again, that's another thing to like Doom Eternal, where you felt a bit too light, and again, almost plastic and hollow compared to what you should do as the Doom Slayer. here you do, like you said, you feel like a tank. You feel heavy. You feel weighty. You really feel the power of being what you are. And like I think it is just that sort of rhythmic feedback you get from everything that just it's so satisfying. Like one of the few games this year where like I really didn't give a shit how loud the TV was on. Like I just like it's obviously sadly no Mick Gordon this time around, but that it's still bloody good stuff. Yeah, like I think it's finishing move. I think that did the score this time, and yeah, I mean I've been listening to some of those tracks that are really long, fucking metal tracks, and oh yeah, it's yeah, Mick Gordon stuff was great. Yeah, no doubt about that. But like I don't know, it's this stuff is just like fits the game more. Like in a way, like Mick Gordon's music is good, but it didn't necessarily like move with the game in the way it should. This stuff just does. It flows into it so wonderfully, and oh god, yeah, probably one of my favorites in terms of like a soundtrack that really gels with the game it's in.
That's the thing, right? Is that we were both massive fans of Mick Gordon's work, both in Doom 2016 and even in, Doom Eternal for myself, despite the fact that that ultimately, the version of his music that was delivered would lead to his departure from the collaboration with id for, inevitably, Doom the Dark Ages. But, finishing Move Inc., I think, does such a fantastic job of working with inherent differences between the Dark Ages from an aesthetic standpoint to the previous, 2 iterations of Doom that it has done since the reboot. And, it makes for a soundtrack that fucking, if Doom 2016 rips and tears, then, Doom the Dark Ages is like the flail to the face that I think this franchise needed, because of the fact that it is matching the pace of gameplay, which is definitely slower than Doom Eternal, but at the same time, like to your point, it allows it to complement the tankish and the weightiness to combat this time around. That is a byproduct of the fact that, a big part of this game's combat is the parrying, which is one of those, I alluded to it earlier in our chat. I would never in a million years think I would talk about a Doom game and parrying would be fucking one of the aspects to gameplay, but it is so well implemented. It's like that shield saw is not only so satisfying that it allows you to basically like get to see what it would be like if Captain America could just like decapitate motherfuckers with that thing, but the parry focus that it applies to combat, it allows for this really satisfying rhythm that you were talking about, right? Where it's like you're not only parrying, but then you get that slow-mo, and then it allows you to utilize the gun that you have in store to deal with some of the enemies that you literally can't defeat unless you use that parry feature, which is this really great sort of like well-rounded approach to ensuring that certain mechanics in this game are, you can't ignore them if you want to progress. And I think that reinforcement of like this new aspect of what Doom is in terms of this tank approach and this sort of like stand your ground and fight, it ultimately just makes for a game that plays unlike any of the previous Dooms, but the changes that are here feel like they've been a part of Doom, in my opinion, for like years. It feels like, oh, well, yeah, parrying has just always been a part of Doom. And I think that it really is that seamless transition of new features that allows Doom the Dark Ages to feel like a fitting continuation, evolution on what has already worked so well in this new modern age reboot of Doom. But at the same time, like progressing it forwards in a way that we hadn't previously seen, but is really being seamlessly implemented in a way that it doesn't feel to the degree that it's like, well, we're going to kind of like throw out the Doom playbook. It's like, we're going to add new features, surely. But they're being implemented in a way that feels like it's reflective of this new era of Doom. But at the same time, like, yeah, we're not going to rest on the laurels basically of 2016 or Jesus, as I say that out loud, that's fucking 10 years old next year, but this new era of Doom. So for those reasons, while I still honestly could not give less of a shit about this Doom lore and the like history of it and all this shit, like I think from a gameplay standpoint, in my opinion, this new era of Doom just gets better and better and more satisfying in ways that, as someone that grew up playing the original Doom 3 was a massive sort of, moment in my gaming history, if you will. But I seriously, I can't get enough of Doom, and I just look forward to seeing what comes next.
It always seems to do interesting things and experiment with what they're doing. So, yeah, I'm very much keen to see, even if it isn't Doom next, whatever it is, it's probably a shooter. So that's all that matters. And see what they do with that.
Hopefully, they'll get to Quake one day. I know how badly you're wishing that they would do that, but
as long as it's more like Quake 1 than not Quake 4, but that'd be fine.
Well, hopefully you'll get that doom-laden day in the sun. But I think in the meantime, someone that is not as well versed in Quake as you are, like Doom: The Dark Ages, hopefully at least was able to somewhat scratch that itch for you, even if maybe not completely, so to speak.
Setting and tone-wise, there was stuff in it that was just like, I mean, to be honest, I think we had this discussion before about modern Doom being a lot like old Quake in terms of how it is structured. So, yeah, we probably won't get a Quake game because of that. But yeah, the more Quake that's in Doom, the better for me.
There you go. Always got to be optimistic. See those influences where they can crop up.
That's it. More Quake, less rage. That's it.
Hopefully they'll keep that trend going. But that's going to do it for our Part 1 Game of the Year coverage. We've already, it was great to have a year where it seems like we didn't have to skip our first 4 picks for an episode and having a second part of our Game of the Year chat that was 2.5 hours long compared to an hour for the first part. So that was a nice change of pace.
This was a healthy sized episode.
Yes.
All the same.
For sure it was. And I think that it was great because, we touched upon some picks that we knew we would have some crossover in, which just kind of like makes me even more excited for Part 2, which is going to get into what will arguably be our more surprising second half of the year in terms of our picks, 5 to the inevitable Game of the Year pick. And again, you and I have not spent a great deal of time off air chatting about games that we've really been enjoying. So I think that's going to make it all the more exciting when we get to reveal those picks live on the show.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that we haven't mentioned anything in our top 5s yet is surprising. So I'm interested to see how much crossover there is there. That's going to be the interesting thing. But
Very, very much so. And as an extra reminder before we wrap up, to people that are listening, be sure to tune in on Thursday for our Horror Bites of the Year episode, where Neil and I both are going to run through 5 of our favorite picks for Horror Bites that we've covered. And so that'll be delving into some subgenres of horror that we both have been unable to stop yapping about this year, and getting to cover some of the highlights and maybe even 1 or 2 picks that people might have thought, damn, I'm surprised that wasn't on their early Game of the Year list. But have no fear, those are going to crop up over there on our Horror Bites episode. So those will be, that episode will be live on Thursday. But until then, my friend, I am very much looking forward to continuing our Game of the Year discussion next week. And as always, it is a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
I got you, my man. Until next week.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horror discussions, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcast or Spotify. For show updates and additional content, you can follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube at Safe Room Pod. Additionally, you can join our Safe Room Podcast Discord to chat with us and other horror fans about the genre we all love. And finally, you can send emails to saferoompod@gmail.com if you'd like to share your thoughts on a game we have or are about to cover. Thanks again for listening, and be sure to check out our episode of Horror Bites out this Thursday. And until then, we'll see you guys for a main feed episode next Monday.